I think it's tennis balls hit plus ability. If you need to do the work no matter what, like you
Mm.
have to have done the hours, and in the hours in the right environment. So, like Agassi went to, I think at 12 or 13, he went to the Nick Bollettieri Tennis
Yeah.
Academy in Florida and lived there, and that was his life for 6, 7 years. And yeah, you need to make those big choices and hit the tennis balls and then you need the persistence and all the rest. So yeah, you need a little bit of everything.
And what age did you decide that was a route for you?
I was the youngest of four who all played tennis, so it was always a big part of my life, and I was always good at it, and I suppose constantly taking it in stages. I was 7 or 8. I was playing in tournaments in Limerick and Munster, and then it would go to national tournaments, and 11, 12 then started to go abroad to Europe and on to college in the States, and then the pro tours. There was always these sort of
It was a
stepping stones.
scholarship in the States, was it?
Yeah, I went to Berkeley in California
That's
on
right,
a
yeah.
tennis scholarship. So I was constantly, I suppose, dreaming about it. But then I talk about it in the book at 12 or 13. I go to this big tournament in France, which is kind of like the unofficial World Junior Championships. And I'm looking around now. In hindsight, I was a year young for the age group, but I was looking around going, God, these guys are so good, and I was number one in Ireland, but in Europe was, a good bit down the rankings, and I kind of thought, gee, maybe I'm not going to win Wimbledon here. But, I kept going and managed to have some success in tennis and playing the biggest tournaments. But yeah, it was a lifetime journey.
And those journeys you were done with your family supporting you, obviously you weren't alone in the younger years, were you?
No, they were massively important. And to be honest, if it wasn't for the odd nudge from them, the support was there, but also the odd nudge, go and practice. The days you don't want to practice, you still got to go practice. You don't want to play a tournament, well, you still got to play the tournament. This is kind of what we do. And so there were moments where I didn't want to do those things, but I was kind of pushed to do it at times. And there's pros and cons to that, but obviously it helped me. It helped me achieve things. And by the time I was 18 or 19, I was kind of driving it myself. But there was moments in my teenage years where I could have left it behind. But my parents were sort of like, no, keep going. And I did.
And your role models growing up in tennis, I mean, be born in Birmingham, come back to Limerick and being Irish, it's not a ground as well for our tennis in this country, even in those years. So do you not feel you're following a sport that was unlikely, and what motivated you to keep all that on the road? With rugby or soccer, there must be those role models you look at, I want to do that because it is possible. But in tennis to reach, I mean, we grew up with Matt Doyle, imports, and the Davis Cup, that was incredible, but they weren't born here. So we said, well, that makes sense. But so somebody to be native and say tennis is my chosen field, apart from Sean Sorensen in my time, Matt Doyle, it was very unusual.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess I fell in love with tennis. So at 5, 6, 7, I was watching Wimbledon and I wanted to be Stefan Edberg and Boris Becker. And they were my idols and role models. It was in my family that we played tennis. We lived across the road from a great tennis club in Birmingham, and my sister got really into it. So when we moved back to Ireland, tennis was kind of our main sport, even though my dad had played Gaelic football. So you don't sit down at 7 or 8 with a piece of paper and go, what are my percentage, what are the possibilities here for me to be a pro? I think I should choose rugby, and rugby wasn't professional when I was growing up. It was an amateur sport. So as were Gaelic football and hurling. So my two sports were tennis and soccer. I loved soccer as well. But yeah, tennis was the thing I was best at, I suppose. I was a good soccer player too. But I guess, I loved it. I enjoyed it. I had my ups and downs with it, obviously, but at that really young age, it was just sort of, what I did and what I was good at.
And your up moments would be, in your mind?
I suppose the main feeling for me that I take away is that moment I qualified for Wimbledon, and that match point and falling to my knees and putting my head in my hands and just all that relief. I've just gotten release. I've gone, I've done it. I've gotten to this, the holy grail at Wimbledon, and now everybody who I speak to I'll be able to say I played Wimbledon and they'll understand, I was a good tennis player, I was a professional, and that was important for me, because at the time, I'd already won a couple of challenger events, but you say that to somebody and they don't really know what that means, but they understand what it means to play in Wimbledon. So that was definitely the highlight, along with obviously qualifying for US Open as well, and getting out on a big court in New York against Novak Djokovic was great, even though I was not feeling very well for that match, it was still great to do that as well.
And how's that
So they're
feel,
the two
Conor, when
highlights.
you're out there facing a big monster like that? Where'd you get the resources, even though you weren't well, to say, I've got to do this? Is the mind very strong?
Yeah, I mean, I was so motivated to get out there. It was a shame I was obviously not well, and knew I was never going to be competitive, really. You know, in reality, I wouldn't have played the event. I wouldn't have played the match if it was any sort of other event other than a Grand Slam. So, just went out and hoped for the best. And actually did. I've watched the match back a couple of times. I actually didn't do, considering how I was feeling, didn't do too bad. You know, there were some decent points on that, but it was a tough ask. But I'm glad I went out and played, and I'm so glad I didn't, you know, retire and pull out of the tournament and not get out on court, because it was I still had some lovely moments and people calling from the stand, you know, out calling out where they were from and towns in Ireland. That was a really special moment.
And when you rewatch it a few times, is there a few places you think something might change, or you could have?
Bit more when I watched the Wimbledon match. There's definitely a few more switches of momentum, shall we say, in the Wimbledon match. The US Open was all one way. But no, there were some really good points in the US Open one at times. But I just couldn't, I just couldn't sustain anything. I couldn't play two good points in a row. I wasn't able to get up on my serve. My movement wasn't where it was. It was just, it wasn't pretty, unfortunately. But yeah, still, you know, great to have played out there.
And do people like Novak have an aura? Are they in a different league?
Yeah, they have an aura for sure. Whether that's